Does a great job, is an award-winning teacher, and our intent is to not just replicate the space that he has, but try to enhance the space that he has and include him as part of the design team and how we will accomplish that. But then going vertical with the space, so we don't have as much single-story space on the back of the building going up two-story with that. And then part of that expansion would be, you saw the mention of the expansion of the career technology education programs. Richardson High already has a fairly robust list of career technology education courses, but some of those courses are not necessarily, they don't have the type of classroom that's really conducive for that type of instruction. Health sciences would be a really good example of that. So part of the construction is we'll have the ability to build rooms that are specific to that program instead of taking an existing classroom and just trying to make that work for them. So building a room that would work for them. And we actually have a partnership that we're working on, and Ms. Hayes, is it okay to mention that? With Harris Methodist, that would allow us space at the hospital facility that's located up off of Campbell. And so what we'll be able to do is have real world setting for our kids from all of our attendance areas to attend that space. So construction dollars would be dedicated to that, to be able to update that and make that available and expand that program significantly for all of our students. And so we have 4 priority areas for career technology education that have been determined by Career Technology Education Task Force that's been working for about 2 years. And those 4 areas involve the areas where we have the most significant job growth over the next 10 years. So those types of renovations here at Richardson High. The Multipurpose Activity Center would be located at Richardson High and the other 3 high schools. This is a little more of a challenge here, again, because of the lack of land and lack of options. We really only have one option to construct a space like that here, and it's the practice field that's over just off of Mimosa. And we had some concerns at the Thank You Listening Tour at Richardson High, particularly from the neighbors immediately across Mimosa. And so we've already taken some steps to try to mitigate the impact for them by looking at trying to reduce the height, set it back as far as we can. We've reduced the scope of the facility a little bit too without compromising the functionality, really primarily for band. It wasn't the athletic piece, it was marching band is what drove the size of it there. So those are a couple of large things for Richardson High. There'll be, another thing would be the library renovation at Richardson High, and all of the schools within the feeder pattern would be fairly significant, and you would see a very, very different look, more technology rich environment there than what you have currently that we think would be more conducive to how kids are learning. Going into some of the feeder schools for Richardson High, we mentioned renovation at Prestonwood, and it would be fairly significant. That school was built in the 70s, and it has a design that is less than ideal. Let's say it that way. The office is, has everybody been in, has anybody been in Prestonwood? The office, for those of you that haven't, the office is really sort of in the middle of the building. So as far as controlling access to the building and being able to make sure that visitors are going where they need to go, it's not ideal. We've done some things there to reduce that exposure, but it would pull the office to the front of the building, be able to control entrance egress, give them an ADA accessible clinic with an ADA accessible restroom attached to it, and then renovate all of the common areas, surfaces, walls, floor, ceilings, and then eliminate the pod, what we call pod classrooms, or groups of 4 that are open to one another. That would go away. Another piece that would involve the elementary feeder pattern for Richardson High would be expansion at Northwood Hills, adding 6 classrooms to Northwood Hills to accommodate projected enrollment growth there that will be coming very, very quickly. And so those are just a couple of examples. What you can do for your individual school, if you go to our website and click on the bond portion of it, it allows you to pick a school, and it will pull up a list and show you not only what was part of the 2011 bond that's been completed for that campus, but what's in the proposed 16 bond for each one of those campuses, so that you can see. And it includes the boring stuff too. It's hard to get excited about the roofs and the electrical and the plumbing, but unless they don't work, and then people get very excited about it. But all those items are included there.
Yes, so good. So now we want to open it up to you. We're here to answer any questions that you may have about anything related to bond 2016. So we have microphones that are set up here. If you'd like to come up to the microphone, we think that that might be good. Or we may ask Mr. Bruner if you might come and serve for us as a facilitator of the microphone as well. So that would be helpful. So questions that you may have related to bond 2016. We're here to answer those for you.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one. Okay, so the multi-purpose facility takes the practice field that West uses, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so do the West teams get included in the rotation for using the multi-purpose facility? Because they're out there on that field every time I've ever driven by.
Every afternoon.
Okay, so if they're using it and the high school's using it, how are kids getting home earlier if you've got this extended groups in one field?
The only difference here, you're not losing a field. You're going to have the same number of fields that you have currently. It's just that one of them would be indoors during inclement weather. So the other campuses, like a Pierce that has more land, they're actually going to gain a field. Richardson High, because of the land situation, you won't gain a field, but you won't lose a field. So we'll just have to coordinate scheduling just like we do right now.
So does Richardson currently use that field as well as West using it?
Yes.
They do? Okay.
Mr. Brenner on that.
All right, thank you.
So I have a question about that. So I didn't hear you answer a question. What is West going to do? They're not. You're taking their field away. Are they going to be able to use that same facility? Like right now, soccer's using it after school.
No, I think I answered your question. My answer
I didn't
was
hear
yes. Her question was.
So
would they be
West
able
is going to be able
use
to do an
it?
indoor.
My answer is yes, they would.
Okay.
They would be able to use it.
So can I ask a question? Okay. So I'm appreciative that you're on top of it, paying the bonds back. We're rapid bond paying back. You know, I'm just curious about where this money's coming from. What are you taking away from? I know that there are specific things that you can only use the money for the bond, but it seems like, and I've been working at this for a long time, trying to get children that have dyslexia identified and getting services. The money, I keep being told that we're not going to put any more money into that. I know we have been putting more money into it, not near enough. We're still way behind in getting children served. So is our rapid bond paying taken away from funds, or are they separate? Do you have those in, is that general funds? I mean, I don't know. I don't know about your financing, how you do it. So are we paying back bonds quickly and taking away in other areas, maybe letting buildings go, air conditioners go, like we're not staying on top of the management of, just keeping on top of keeping our buildings in repair, that kind of stuff. That's what I'm curious.
Okay. Let me go back to what I heard on the first part of the
Right.
question there. As far as where does the money come from?
Mm-hmm.
It comes from you. I mean, that's why we're looking at a debt tax rate increase to be able to fund it. And we've calculated the maximum that we would expect would be 8 cents. We calculated that about a year ago when we first started having the conversations. Now, a couple of the variables that we used in that calculation have already changed. One of those is that we used a very conservative interest rate assumption on the first year of the sale of the proposed bond. We used 5.25%. If we were to sell the bonds today, our blended rate would be closer to about a 3.4% blended rate. So that's a fairly significant positive variance on just that one item. Another item is we used a conservative figure as far as the assumption on the taxable value growth for the district as a whole. We used 1% last summer for this year. We're coming in closer to 5%. And then we used 1% thereafter for the next 4 years of that bond cycle. We anticipate now, based on preliminary information that we just received about within the last 10 days from the Dallas Central Appraisal District, that our projected taxable value growth for next year would be closer to the 3.5% to 4% range, and then that would be another positive variance. So it's not, we're not taking away from anything to be able to fund it, but we are asking our voters to, we're saying that it would require no more than an 8-cent increase in the debt tax rate to be able to fund it. So to go to that second part on the dyslexia resources, again, bonds can only be used to pay
Right.
for capital items. So additional teacher allocations and teacher salaries are not eligible to be funded from bonds.
Right, that's
So-
why I was just making sure.
Right, no, you're correct.
Okay.
And so we would have to, we're actually not taking away anything from the operating budget by asking for the bond proposition. It's actually the opposite. If you had these items and you did not put them into a bond and you wanted to pay for them, and this is what we did prior to 2001, we were more of a pay-as-you-go type of a district is what it's referred to. So lots of those types of capital items, we paid for them out of our operating budget. Well, what happened over time was, due to the constraints of the school finance system, we simply could no longer do that. And what it put a lot of pressure on the operating budget. It limited our ability to add staff. It limited our ability to provide raises. And then what it also did is it caused us to defer significant amounts of maintenance that way. And so that's part of why we developed those guiding principles and did that facility assessment study and identified all of the deferred maintenance. It was hundreds of millions of dollars of deferred maintenance over the years that we had neglected because of that approach. And we've made a commitment to not repeat that. So it actually freed up dollars in our operating budget by using the debt service fund, which is what it's intended for, to service debt and use it for paying for capital items that we started back in 2000. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I just have one more question. If the bond does not pass, just say it didn't pass for whatever reason, what are we going to do with the overcrowding in Richardson? We transfer a lot of students from other areas to come over here because our lovely magnets, and my son's here, and it's fantastic. I mean, it's a great place to be. But what's going to happen there? Are we going to maybe get some kids to go back into their feeder areas? Are we going to beef up magnets at other schools to make them more attractive? Just curious, and that's all. Thank you.
The time period where Richardson High, we project that they will get into that range of hitting their capacity. It's closer to 2019, 2020, that school year. And so the thought is for us is we want to schedule that construction in time to be able to accommodate that. So your question of if the bond fails, what do you do? Well, if it were to fail, I mean, I certainly can't speak for the board, but what we would do, I would assume, would be try to figure out why. First of all, go to the community, figure out what it is, what was it that you did not like, why did it not pass? Then we'd have to go through a process very similar to what we've gone through for the last 17 months to identify the projects that needed to be included, and then we would have to come back. The first date that you could legally come back with another referendum would be the next uniform election date, which would be November. Now that probably would not be realistic because you wouldn't have enough time. The schedule for elections require us to call, or the board to call an election. It's about 3 months ahead of the actual election day. For example, the May election, the board was required to call that election, take action to call it in February. So 3-month window, so if you roll back November 3 months, we'd have to call it in August, and that means we'd have all that work that would have to be done between May and August probably wouldn't happen. So you're looking at May of 2017 realistically before you could come back with another referendum. Now what would happen during that time period is things are going to break, things are going to fail, and we would have to simply try to ration the available funds and address those. We would move back to where we were prior to 2001. It would be break fix for that year. And then we would lose a year on the schedule for construction for any of the projects. Now, the ones that happen a little sooner, it's not Richardson High. The ones that are earlier in that cycle that we would anticipate trying to address quicker would be Northwood Hills, because they will hit that capacity number sooner than Richardson High will. And then the renovation work at those 3 schools we mentioned. And the reason it's only 3 is that we started the process in 2001, and we took the oldest schools first. So we took the schools that were built in the 50s or earlier, and they received renovations in the 2001 bond. The 2006, it was schools built in the 60s, and the 2011 bond, it was most of the schools built in the 70s, except for those 3. And the reason we had to leave those 3 off was that we felt like we needed to hold the line on the bond amount to the amount that we could issue without going up on the debt tax rate because of what was going on with the economy in 2011. So those 3 campuses have been very patient. They are the last in line. And so we feel like we have a commitment that we started in 2001 to those schools, and we need to honor that commitment. They would be towards the front of that line. So that would push their cycle out a year. That's what would occur if it were to fail. I hope that answers your question. However you want to do it, Mr. Brenner.
We have a question up here.
Okay.
Am I on? Yeah,
We'll get right down here next.
Thank you. So we saw the statistics of projections of students, but in the bond here, I only see expansion for high schools. So of course, students will be uniformly distributed. They won't all be in high schools. So how is the district balance that the obvious need for more space, or that more students will attend both elementary and junior highs with these expansions, these physical expansions of high schools?
That wave of growth is already hitting the elementaries and has hit a number of them. And I'll give you some examples. We mentioned the other funds that are available to our board to be able to address capital projects like additions to campuses. We've used those over the last several years to complete expansions at a number of elementary schools. The most recent is Prairie Creek Elementary. They have a project there to add 6 classrooms that will be completed this summer. We've already added classrooms to Mohawk, Dover, Richland, Wallace, White Rock, Merriman Park, Forest Lane Academy, Skyview, Stoltz Road, and I'm missing one, I think. Forest Meadow Junior High. That's it. Thank you, Ms. Caston. So we were able to do that over the last several years using those capital projects funds. And so we've used that long-range projection on enrollment growth to try to anticipate that, try to stay ahead of it if we could. Now, we've had some growth, particularly to the south, that has occurred at a more rapid rate than what was projected. And so we have not, we're still playing catch-up down there, so we're overflowing more students still, even with the expansions. And we're trying to accommodate that within this bond proposition. So to the extent we can, and it fits in with the bond planning, we really like to include those expansions as part of this. So you see, like Northwood Hills and Mark Twain, those expansions at those schools are included in this bond package. But most of the others have already been addressed through that capital project. Okay.
I get nervous when I see this microphone so soon. If I look at your annual report for the last 10 years, your full-time equivalent teachers, they're at 2466 10 years ago, and they were about average all the way through. In fact, now they're at 2493. So in effect, FTE students haven't grown at all. So I don't know how that translates into enrollment. And I want to make sure I understand, our general obligation bonds were $430 million. This new offering is going to be more than that. So have we been fiduciarily responsible with our past maintenance? Because if I look at the annual report, our annual plant operations and maintenance has been averaging $25 million per year for each of the last 10 years. So I'm trying to make all this match.
I'm going to take the second half of that, and I'm going to let Dr. Stone or Dr. Medina talk about the FTEs. We think we've been fiduciarily responsible. What happens with those dollars is part of that long-range facility plan is it's not necessarily even over that 5-year or over that long-range period. So you take just those components that would reach end of useful life within that 5-year block. And that's vacillated. If you go back to 2001, we issued a $351 million bond in 2001 to try to catch up on some of the larger amounts of the deferred maintenance. So at this point, we are really caught up on the deferred maintenance. So what we want to do now is continue to provide the maintenance and replacement cycle that's been established going back to 2000. If you look at the bond cycle in 2006, it was only $145 million, but there were fewer items within that 5-year cycle that would reach end of useful life. And then in 2011, it went up to $171 million. And then now, if you look at just the items that would reach end of useful life within this particular proposition, it's $215 million. So it varies from cycle to cycle, just depends on which components come up.
But we're doubling our debt with this offer.
The amount that's in the proposition is an amount that is close to what we have in existing debt right now. The total outstanding debt will not double, because part of what's happening is we're paying down the debt. That $440 million in existing debt, within this 5-year cycle, we will repay $143 million of that 440 outstanding within the 5-year cycle. So you
That's
have
already built into our tax rate.
it's already built in, and so that gets paid down. So it's not like that debt stays static during that whole period of time. The $437 million in the proposition will not be sold all at once. You would only sell that and try to match the projects, match the debt issuance with when you anticipate addressing the projects. So it would be staggered over the 5-year period. Under the maximum calculation that we use to determine the 8 cents, we can issue a maximum of $104 million in year 1 of the bond sale. That's the maximum. Now, typically in the first year of a bond sale, you don't have as large of an issuance because it's difficult to address some of the larger capital projects because you have not had enough time to design them. But you do have some of the things, like some of the roofs and the HVAC items can be addressed that. You typically see some of your larger capital projects hit in year 2 or 3 or 4. Of course, everybody wants to be on the front end of it as much as they can. Nobody wants to be in year 5. But that's what you typically see. So we can issue another $104 million in year 2. And then it's staggered out from there. So the sale of those bonds would be staggered over the 5-year period. I think the high point as far as debt for us, if you consider the pay downs and the debt issue and the pay downs on the debt issue, would be in the about $600 million or so.
But what was the annual $25 million of maintenance? What was that being spent on, and why do we have so much deferred maintenance accumulated at this point in time?
Well, we don't have any deferred maintenance accumulated at this point in time. We had that, and that was this is just part of the regular cycle. This is not deferred maintenance. This is just items that we anticipate reaching the end of the useful life within the 5-year period. They haven't reached the end of useful life, but we anticipate that they will. Now, if we're going to defer it, what we would do is we would say, we know that it's going to reach the end of life in the next 5 years, we're just going to ignore that. That's deferring it. And that's what we did up until 2001, is we deferred it. We waited until it actually failed before we replaced it. And that is difficult to do on some of the systems we have. Large chillers, big, huge roof projects, that's a very difficult proposition, and that's what was happening for years. So we did, up until 2000, we did defer a lot of maintenance. That's why that first bond was so large, and then we had, the next 2 bonds, a fairly significant portion of those bond issues were just to catch up on the maintenance. We don't have the deferred maintenance now.
And I think you had another question about.
Well, yeah,
on the FTE,
full-time
sorry.
is 2,500, our total employees are 4,800. That differential, i.e. administration, seems like a pretty high proportion, so therefore one can argue, are we being fiduciarily responsible?
Thank you. I didn't get your name, I'm sorry, very clearly.
My name is Ted Bathurst.
Thank you. First of all, it's a wonderful opportunity, first of all, for me to thank our board for continuously being responsive to our needs at the campus level. For some time, in terms of our class sizes, we have been able to maintain, and we had a class size of an average of 19 approximately 19 students to one for quite some time. And as we began to increase our enrollment growth, we were able to maintain our FTEs and bring the class sizes up to 22. So really we were maximizing our our full-time equivalent. But that doesn't go to say that that's necessarily that it's necessarily optimal, because we know that particularly in the Lake Highlands area, that we also had a good deal of overflow, which is part of the reason that we bring to you as part of this package the idea of adding an additional campus. Now, the other thing I want to say is that the board has been very supportive of not only classroom teachers, but also teachers in special areas. So been able to address, in particular, over the last several years, teachers and someone pointed out, for our dyslexia program. If you listen to our most recent board meeting, we have on the table an additional 16 dyslexia teachers to support our special area. And that's just a good example. Other areas over the years have included fine arts, art, music, and PE at the elementary level, as well as other special areas. And this year, actually, to support the growth as it continues to bubble up and move up through the grade levels, we're asking for an additional 14 allocations at the secondary level, as well as 4 additional ones at the elementary level. And we'd imagine that we'd have to continue to come to the board to be responsive as we see the trends, because we see that we're headed to 41,000 students. And certainly from an HR perspective, we're going to continue to be responsive and assess our class sizes and those needs as well. So that's a good question, and I appreciate that.
What was the enrollment 10 years ago?
My goodness, I remember when I first was a campus principal, I remember maybe 34,000 students back then. Tony Harper, do you? I remember when I was a principal back at Dover, it was about 34,000, and it just gradually just continued to increase over the years. And now we're at about 38,000 approximately. So it's increased, and so have the FTEs, not just in the classroom, but in the special areas as well.
But I do think it's important to understand, when you look at your total number of personnel and you look at the total number of teachers, the difference between those two numbers are not administrators. What is included in that total FTE count are all of the custodians, the child nutrition workers, the aides, the executive assistants, the principals, the support staff are all part of that number as well.
So what I read is, if I didn't see a change in FTE, one would argue that what the inference is that you don't have a change in enrollment if you have the same class size. So I was just trying, if the enrollment is steady, why could tell are we going to issue $473 million in bonds? And then the next question is, one of the things that always happen with bond, they always pass, especially when you do it in May, because the people are going to vote for it, people have a vested interest. Okay, and I always get concerned about, do we load in things, need to have versus want to have? Like I see these multicultural centers, and do we really need to have these?
Well, that's the reason we went through the 22 stop thank you listening tour and got feedback from hundreds and hundreds of our community members about what needed to be, what they wanted to see included in the bond. That's why we had multiple meetings with our Community Bond Advisory Committee to let them dive into that number and to make that determination about what they want to recommend.
There's two players, people that want the benefit and the people that have to pay for it.
Absolutely.
Well, they're all community members, and they all are having to pay for it. So I think everyone that's involved has got some skin in that game. But that's part of why we go through that process, and that's part of why you get to vote on May 7th. But we've tried to look at the items. If you go back to that total, 215 million of the 437 million simply represent things and systems that we have that will reach end of useful life within the 5-year period. 114 million or so, I can't remember, we can put that back up. I'm sorry, 107 million are capacity construction, and the lion's share of that is just to deal with enrollment growth. I think there's $11 million in there or so, approximately, for the renovation work at the 3 elementary schools. So you're looking at almost, just roughing the math, 70 to 75% of the total are just to fix or take care of the things that will fail within the 5-year period and address enrollment growth. And then you've got about 25% that are for the enrichment piece. And so that's where a lot of the dialogue was. I don't think anybody necessarily needs to debate if the roof is going to fail or reach end of useful life at Richardson High within that 5-year period. Do you need to replace the roof? There wasn't a lot of discussion about whether you do or don't do it. I think most people are of the opinion if it's going to fail within that period, you fix it. So most of the discussion was around the enrollment growth, whether that figure was large enough, and that figure grew as a result of the thank you listening tour. It started off about closer to $60 million, and because of the feedback that we received and the concerns, we added dollars to that and we took it away from some other areas. And then the enrichment piece, that's where most of the dialogue occurred, is what should be in there, what do you want in there, what do we want for students? And of course, not everybody agrees about that at all, but that, again, that's why people get to vote about it. So,
Other questions?
Mr. Brenner, where are you?
Up here.
Okay.
Hi, one question I have is about the tax service and once that's paid off, the debt, does the tax rate go back down? Is that an option? And have you ever done that? That was one question. The second question I did have also was, I don't know if you're aware of this, the Vote No group that's going around and they're urging voters to vote no now, and so that you'll go back and redo this proposal and take out those enrichments. And I guess I wanted to hear from you all your opinion on that, or what you would say in response to that, and what kind of, I guess, competitive advantage would Richardson School District get with those enrichments included in the bond?
To go to the first part of your question on the, yes, what would happen is if you didn't issue any additional debt and you just took your existing debt, what we've done on that long-range debt plan is we have built in capacity with our long-range structure in 5-year increments. So the notion is, and there's nothing magic about that, it doesn't have to be 5 years. It could be, I wouldn't necessarily recommend longer than that. It could be shorter period of time than that. We landed on 5 years. If you go out more than 5 years, it becomes very difficult to project costs. It's already difficult to project costs 6-7 years away from when they'll actually occur. So if you had a bond package that had a 10-year window, it becomes extremely problematic to try to project costs out 10, 12 years. If you go more frequently than that, then the concern would be, how do you address some of the large projects if you're going out for voter approval every single year or every 2 years? When you've got a 2-year construction window, it becomes very difficult. Plus you have voter fatigue. People just get tired of having propositions in front of them all the time, and they start to say, well, you guys just need to get your act together and plan better for it. So the 4 to 5 year range is what we've landed on. So if you look at our debt schedule, there is capacity in that 5-year increment where we have a step down that would allow us to issue additional debt. And we had a certain amount of this. We could have issued $235 million worth of debt and not raise the debt tax rate at all. That was the capacity number that we had. And people, that always seems to confuse folks. They think we're trying to trick them, that how can you issue more debt and not go up on my debt tax rate? It's because of how quickly we pay down the debt. That creates that capacity. So $235 million is what we could have done without raising the debt tax rate. That was shared with our Community Bond Advisory Committee, and they considered that. And then we looked at at increments of each penny. Beyond that, how much additional capacity did it generate? So that's how that comes up. So if you had no additional debt and you just tried to service your existing debt, now you're going to get into the deferred maintenance and all those other kinds of things again, like we did prior to 2001. But yes, your debt tax rate could float down over time if all you were doing is just taking care of what's on the books right now. Now, have we ever lowered the debt tax rate? Absolutely. We did it as part of the 2006 bond. We lowered your debt tax rate. People completely forget that. I have not forgotten that, by the way, but most people forget. They think, what have you done for me or to me lately instead of what has happened over time. So we lowered it, and that does not happen often, and there aren't that many districts that do that, but we did lower it as part of the 2006 bond.
I want to speak to the enrichment question that you brought up about What would that mean if the bond was to fail in terms of academics? Is that it's my side, instruction, I'm the deputy superintendent over curriculum and instruction. A couple of you spoke to the enrichment piece, so let me talk about a couple of those items. First of all, the multipurpose practice facilities, those are either 4 of them, 1 at each high school. We started looking at those months ago. Actually, those were proposed in the last bond. So that is how long that Richardson ISD has been studying whether or not that is something that we wanted to add to the high school complement in terms of the high school facilities. We started, and so they've been saying that for a long time. It didn't make it into the last bond, but it kept coming up in terms of a request that we would seriously consider whether or not that would be something that we would add on to our high schools. All through the listening tour, we had lots of conversation about that. Originally, when they first were proposed, they were roughly around 20 million apiece. And so we listened to the community through that listening process, and we reduced the scope of those. And what we did find out, though, as we visited schools, visited districts, is that when a high school is built now, and any district builds a high school, they will build, obviously, their campus. Some of them, sometimes they build the cafeteria and the gymnasium. But as part of the standard high school complement, they're all schools are building a multi-purpose practice facility. So that was one of the things that we learned from that. In terms of the amount of time that they are used, roughly around 10 hours a day, in listening to all of the school districts and all of the campuses that have those. They have students in them 10 hours a day. And a lot of the things that we hear are, well, that's just for the athletes. And when we go, and I went and talked to the lots of different campuses that have them, and I heard more about non-athletes than I did about athletes, because the athletes and the coaches want to have their students out in the elements. They want to have them acclimating to the heat. And so most of the time, in fact, when we went to visit the one in Waco, it was covered with band students. There were some soccer players that were in there, but then there were some drill team girls that were in there, and we talked to some of the teachers, and they talked about how much that the PE classrooms go in there to use them. And also, recently, I just talked to someone who is a colleague of mine in another district that talked about how they take academic classrooms in there to do physics experiments and those kinds of things. I could go on and on about curriculum instruction. That's just the one. Another one of the enrichment items that is on there is technology. Now, there's 2 pieces of technology that are included in this bond. First of all, there's $59 million that's not even included as an enrichment. It is just to replace everything that's going to be at its end of useful life. Then there's an additional $19 million that are for enrichments. And that is to go in and to ensure that we have a standard classroom complement in every single one of our 2,447 classrooms. And there's been a lot of questions about whether or not that this bond had to do with academic areas and how, in particular, the technology will definitely enhance instruction in every one of our classrooms. And so if the bond were to fail, then we would not only lose that $59 million that's not even included in the enrichment as part of that. So that would have an impact. It could have an impact in that way.
And then,
did I answer your question? Thank
just
you.
2 little pieces just to add to that. As far as the multi-purpose activity centers, they weren't just considered in the last bond. That's something that's been discussed going back to 2006. So it's been a long time in the making. To go to the last part, then I know we'll move on. There's Mr. Brenner. Keep losing you in the crowd. You mentioned the vote no. Certainly everybody's entitled to their opinion. That's why we take it for a vote referendum. Everybody gets a chance to vote. And I know the gentleman, I think you mentioned, the assumption that they would pass. We don't assume a bond will pass. I mean, we've enjoyed the support of the community. We've worked really hard for the last 18 months to try to gather input, and that's why we did the 22-stop thank you listening tour, which was not nearly as pleasant as it might sound like it was. Just to get input. It was a good process for us, but it was a very involved process just to hear what people had to say. What did they want to include? What did they not want to include? And we tried to make modifications to it as far as what ultimately got proposed. So we think we've done more than what has been done in the past to try to gather that input. One last little tidbit, and I'll go to whoever you've got your next question with. I think it's an interesting thing to note. The referendum that we had the lowest level of voter approval on, what do you think was included in the bond? Some of you are ringers, and you've heard me say this before, I think. Does anybody have an idea? That's it. It was when we put air conditioning in the schools. Back in the early 50s, we had the lowest voter approval of any bond referendum we've ever had when we were trying to install air conditioning. If we came to you now and said, we're just going to forego air conditioning at Richardson High because it's too expensive, that would be completely unacceptable for you. But I just think it's interesting how the perspective has changed over 66 years. So,
I want to say one more thing about those 22 meetings that we had, because I've been in 2 former districts. One, Laura, came from Mesquite. I spent 20 years in Mesquite. We went through a couple of different bond cycles. And the procedure that we used when I was in Mesquite was that the board would call for the bond, that the administration, the educators, everyone would decide what was going to be in the bond package, and then the board would call for the bond, and then we would go out and engage the community. So when I came to Richardson and learned that we would have 22 meetings before the board called for the bond, I was a little bit surprised about that process. But experiencing that, which I really did enjoy that experience, experiencing that and listening to the community, and then every time that we would have one of those meetings, we would go back to the drawing board or back to conversation, and we would talk about, okay, what did they say? What do we need to change? And there were some really dramatic changes that were made, and I got it. I understood. This is why you invest all of that time with the community before the board calls for the bond. And so through that process, we would say that, we didn't hear, take that out, or we don't want that. And what, we heard is we listened through that entire process what the community wanted, with confidence to go to the board and say, this is what the community is asking for. Next question.
And I feel like I need to just clarify, it's not that it wasn't a good process. There can be good processes that you don't enjoy. Going to the dentist is a good process if you not enjoy it. So it was a very good process, though.
I'm back here with a bunch of fellow alumni from different schools in the district, but I was a K through 12 graduate. My brother John's coached in the district for 20 plus years. We have 3 sons in the district. A couple of them in dyslexia class, so we've accessed a lot of the programs that the district has done. And the one thing that I guess I would stress is if the board feels that it's necessary and it seems like the elephant in the room is this multi-purpose facility, which I know has been cut in size and dollar amount over the last number of months. But I think what gets lost in the shuffle is we all are shareholders, property owners in this area, and I think one thing that gets lost is the firm I work for, we moved up off of Legacy in the tollway, and in the next 3 years we're up on the 12th floor, and I look out my window and I can see where Toyota's going in, there's Liberty Mutual, there's Fannie Mae's going up there, JP Morgan. There's about 20,000 new jobs that are coming up to that area right there in Plano and 121 and Frisco, and you go up to where all that cowboy development is. And as a resident here and as having my children here, I want us to be competitive, and I want us to have our share of the Toyota employee, of these businesses that are relocating here. And if we don't pass these items, whether you agree with it or not, we're just not as competitive in the facilities. We're not. If you look at it from an athletic standpoint, you go to the Frisco schools, McKinney schools, or even out to the west a little bit in Flower Mound or Coppell. So I think at the end of the day, if you look at it as a whole, whether you agree with it or not, if we can generate and get more excitement and more folks into our area, more new couples, then at the end of the day, we all benefit because it will drive our property values up and thus making our schools better. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
I just had a question. I think you mentioned that the board, 90% of the board was on board with one proposition. So I just wondered what the benefit was of having one proposition rather than having just different parts of it that we could vote priority-wise instead of having everything lumped into one.
Right.
Good question.
It was actually 90% of our community bond advisory committee. Our board was unanimous in, when they called the election for it to be a single proposition. So 90% of our community members that served on the community bond advisory committee voted for it to be a single proposition.
And that was 60 people?
Pardon?
That was 60 people?
Yes, 90% of the 60. So 54 of them voted for that to be a single proposition. And they debated that over a number of meetings over several months. And the pro, well, let me give you the con. The con for it is you don't have choice. So, there were people that initially said, well, break it into pieces and give voters choice about, each one of these different components. And I think there was some concern with the committee, and we have several members here, and I don't want to speak necessarily for them, but my takeaway from listening to them was they were concerned about having programs be competing against one another. They felt like if you start doing that, there's every bond cycle doesn't necessarily have something for everyone, so you have to kind of take turns. So some cycle up and you have a heavier portion for career and technology education, or you have a heavier portion for fine arts. It's not that curriculum instruction is not important, it just typically is not as capital intensive. And so you have fewer items that would qualify for it. So we have items that are included for that, but they go in cycles. And so I think the concern and the comment and the feedback that I heard from them was, if we felt like it was worth considering, it should be, all of it should be together. And does anybody that served on the committee have something they'd like to add to that? Did I misstate that? Would you like to add?
Yeah. In one of the original meetings, when we started looking at was being offered and saw the multi-purpose facilities, I felt a little concerned. Is this something we really want to do? It's a lot of money. It's going to raise the tax rate. We haven't done that in a while. Maybe we should separate it out. But as we went into more detail in what was happening, we're getting a lot of benefits out of that, aside from just the facility. We're getting storage for all of the fine arts stuff. We're getting new weight rooms. So we're getting things that we would have had to put in maybe a regular part of the bond anyway to take care of some of those items. So in the end, I kind of felt like, it makes more sense to put it all into one, because the multi-purpose facility is the main one you would think that we would separate out. And then we would lose some of the other benefits, as you said, in terms of competing priorities.
I just want to say, when we started off, I think everybody, it was like, hey, let's split it all up.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are that way.
And we had people from every school, so nobody was favored. And as the process went along, we all came together and said, this is a better, as one offering. So everybody in the city had an opportunity to be on this committee as well. So,
No.
Parents, right?
right.
No.
It wasn't selected people, it wasn't, my cousin, it was everybody.
Your cousin
Not
wasn't
true.
on the committee?
No, my cousin wasn't on the committee. But, as a group representing the citizens, we all came together with the same conclusion. And I think the board's done a great job. I think, Tony, you're full-time with this thing, right? Yeah. You don't work yourself left, right? On weekends or, you have done a great job. You for 20 years, have taken this RISD to great levels of compliance. So,
The only other concern on the split proposition versus single proposition has to do with the status of the bonds. It was mentioned in the video, we issue what are considered general obligation bonds. And what that means is we give you a list of the things that we would reasonably expect to complete with those dollars. And we've honored that request going, back as far as I can remember. I mean, you only get a chance to not honor it one time, and then the next time you go to voters, you're going to have a problem. So we work really hard to say, if we say we're going to include this scope, we deliver that scope. But with general obligation bonds, what happens is, if you have a variance on an expenditure, let's say I'll use the auditoriums, for example, that we renovated as part of the 2011 bond at the 4 high schools. When we got into that project, we determined that we needed to do more than what was originally identified. There were some safety issues and there were some other things when we got into it. It's sort of like renovating your house. When you tear into the wall, you find things. And so we found things. And so we needed to alter that scope and we needed to make other dollars available. And we were able to do that because we had positive variances in other areas where it didn't cost us as much as we originally projected to be able to deliver those things. So with a general obligation bond, you can do that. With a specific obligation bond, you can't. And so if you go out for a single proposition on anything, multi-purpose activity centers, libraries, whatever you say, and that amount that you put on that ballot is X dollars. If the variance on that amount is positive, you cannot take those dollars and use them for any other eligible project at all. That was just one of the logistical concerns. So a little bit longer answer than you probably wanted. Mr. Broom.
Sorry, that's the teacher in me having my back to a crowd. It's terrible. My name is Ewan Blackman. I spoke at the last meeting, asked a couple of pertinent questions. I'm very passionate about students. I'm very passionate about the job I do. Like I said, last time I gave up a career to get into teaching. I've been teaching 13 years. I teach physics, pre-AP physics. And I just want to say thank you to the board because, again, I said last time, it is a thankless and payless job a lot of times. And it is a painful process for sure. So I do thank them for that. I would like to build a better bond. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about being against anybody. You say the support of the community. RISD, I think, has great support from the community, myself included. I think you guys do a fantastic job with the resources we have across the schools. But I'm saying no, and this is an information meeting, so I assume I can give some information, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on the information. On a variance by about 10%, I mean, don't haggle a figure or two here if it's only off by 5% variance. But I think Ted had the issue earlier, talking about the 420 million we have, and you mentioned we'll have 140 million paid off in 5 years, but that's 280 million left, and according to the 437 million we add to that, in 5 years we'll have 717 million in debt. And we'll be paying around interest of about 35 million. And if I'm not mistaken, that interest payment comes out of our general fund. On top of that, we have 30 million we're paying right now per year on the principal of the outstanding debt that we do have, which is where the pay down comes down. I don't know about you folks, but I hate having debt on my credit card because I see an interest payment there. Even if it's $20, I don't like that. And maybe I'm old-fashioned that way, but I think we're robbing from future generations if we're paying that much interest to get a loan somewhere without looking at how we can pay for it in other ways. Our football fields, the ones that have garnered these multi-purpose facilities, will garner an additional $1 million per year for maintenance on those fields that'll come out of the general budget, which won't help things like your FTE employees, bringing more teachers on, etc., because that's got to come somewhere. That'll come out of the budget. And yes, I recognize every year the budget goes up. Why does it go up? Because us, and I own a home in Richardson, my son Richard J.J. Pierce, love Richardson. My taxes go up because the value of the houses go up, and so we have more money coming in. So absolutely, those things will increase, but we're proposing to add $1 million a year in extra maintenance, and we're being told the maintenance we're trying to pay for now with this bond, $215 million, might be deferred maintenance if we don't get taken care of now, but we're going to add more to that anyways. And then I'd like to also just address a couple of things with regards to the money. We had a surplus this year of 20-somewhat million, and we decided to build an alternate high school and a maintenance facility has taken up several acres of prime real estate down here off of Abrams and Greenville without voter approval, without bringing it to the voters. So I'd certainly appreciate you guys did a bond listening tour, But then we had surplus, and what did we do with it? Well, we didn't go pay down the debt. We decided to build other little projects that we didn't have to talk to the voters about because we thought we really need those, and when we might well need them. But when do we get a choice? We live in America, right? Where I live in countries where you get no choice. But we have a woman's right to choose. We have a choice between Democrats and Republicans. We have a choice wherever we go. Why do we not give the voters the choice to say, hey, 59 million, let's think about that. That's a lot of money for 4 football fields. And then uniforms on top of that. We're paying for uniforms for 40 years. I recognize that the board has done a great job. A AAA rating is amazing. But we don't keep a AAA rating by not holding our folks accountable to where we're spending that money. What are we spending that money on? And so I'm not saying no, never. I'm not saying no, don't spend money on children. I'm saying don't spend it on this bond. Let's build a better bond, and it'll be quicker than you can believe because we can scrap a few of these things, leave ones that are really in there that good, and come back in November. But by the way, there's an added cost for having this bond election in May because it's the only election happening in May. In November, we have a bunch of other elections. We can spread that money around and not spend so much for Richardson ISD to pay to even have the election. So I say build a better bond. Let's go no. Let's do this in November. Thank you, sir.
That wasn't a question, so we probably
you're right.
need to stick to the question piece.
Well, I need to respond because there are several pieces of misinformation in what you shared. And I may have forgotten the first one. Sorry, one of those compound questions are hard for me sometimes.
I get it.
I'll try to remember that. I think there are like 4 points that I want to try to make, and maybe somebody can help me if I miss one of the 4. First of all, and it goes to this gentleman's question, we're not going to have $700 and something of outstanding debt at any point in time. You got to remember, we continue to pay down the debt every single year. So the existing debt, there's a significant principal payment every single year. The new debt, as it's issued, we will pay down, even in the first year after it's issued, we will pay a portion of that debt down. And we will do that every single year. So the high point for us is somewhere around $600 million is what it would be within that period of time. I mean, you know, and I know you didn't want me to quibble about rounding, but there's a big difference between $600 million and $700 million. So in my mind, that's $100 million. So that's not quibbling. That's $100+ million. That's a lot of money in anybody's book. So we're not paying for uniforms with 40-year debt. We talked about that in the video. We talked about that at the beginning. What we do is match the life of the asset with the life of the liability. So if we've got an asset like a computer or a uniform and it has a 5-year useful life, we're paying down a corresponding amount of that debt within that 5-year period. We are not, that is simply not true. We are not paying for a uniform with 40-year bonds. We don't even sell 40-year bonds. First of all, I mean, the longest maturity we have in there is, I think, 25 years at most. So we're paying down the debt quickly. We are not financing short-term assets with long-term debt. We haven't done it since 2001 when we started and made that commitment. So that just simply isn't true. 2 of the other points. The interest paid. The interest gets paid out of the debt service fund. It's governmental accounting is fund accounting. You have different buckets of money is the simplest way to think about it. The general fund can be used to pay for any legal expenditure. The debt service fund can only be used, only to service debt. That's it. That's all you can do with it. We have a series of other funds and they can only be used for specific purposes. So we could pay for interest out of the general fund, but that's what the debt service fund is for. So the interest expense that would be incurred will be funded out of the debt service fund. That's what causes the maximum of an 8-cent debt tax rate increase.
But
so
what funds the debt service fund?
And we're going to, the notion of don't pay for it with, don't incur debt and pay for it out of another bucket. There is no other bucket. There's the general obligation, your general fund, but you already have limitations there under the school finance system. And if we were to go to that philosophy, we would be regressing to where we were prior to 2001. And what will happen, is you will get back to having millions and millions of dollars of deferred maintenance. And we made a commitment in 2001 that we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't fall back into that deferred maintenance mode. We would stay proactive, we would honor the long-range facility plan, and that's what we're going to do. or that's what we're proposing. So, and I know there was one other point that I had it and it flew away in all of that. Does
And
anybody
Mr. Hawk,
else
Mr.
want
Harcourt.
to help me with that?
Sorry, Mr. Harcourt.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. The money that was spent on the projects, non-traditional program is one. The only regret I have about that is that we didn't do it sooner. Because we are failing to serve hundreds of kids. Maybe not your kid, and maybe not your kid, and maybe not my kid, but we have hundreds of kids that are dropping out of our system that we are not meeting their needs. Hundreds of them. We have a program right now with, that's at our Kristen McAuliffe Learning Center. We have a capacity there to be able to serve about 65 kids. 65. We're expanding it next year and bringing it over to Bergner temporarily until that facility gets built. And once that facility is built, we'll be able to serve about 500 kids a year. We think that's huge. So as far as being a good use of the dollars, absolutely. And again, the only regret, we should have done it sooner. That's it. And we'll come to that. We've got Mr. Brenner with the microphone. So, you know, as far as the projects and the voter approval on that, you know, we adopt a $296 million budget. And there is, under the law, the way that that's approved is through your board of trustees. So your voice on that, in that regard, is to elect a board of trustees that's going to administer the budget and adopt a tax rate in accordance with the wishes of the community. If you're not happy with that, you have an opportunity every year to elect a different one. So that's where the voice is on that. I mean, you know, it's not that we're trying to circumvent anything, but we had a need there, and we tried to address that need for those students. The operations center, we're about a decade behind on doing that. We should have done it a long time ago, but we tried to put our campuses first on that, and we got to the point where we were either going to have to include significant dollars in the bond to address the facility, because the facility we have over at 400 South Greenville is not adequate. It's not big enough. You know, we talk about all the growth and we talk about adding classrooms, and people forget that you have to add support staff to be able to service all those teachers and all those additional students that occur. So, you know, we're not hiding it. It's there. It's part of what the board adopts. They've been talking about it for, you know, a year and a half, at least. So I think there was at least one other point, and if it comes to me as we're going through the others. Oh, cost of election. Our board of trustee election is in May. It's been in May, I think, for 65 years. So for us, having the bond election in May does not create an incremental cost, because we're already going to have a board election in May. Splitting it and having it in November creates an incremental cost, because now we'll still have one in May for the board, and then we would have another in November. And I think there might have been one more point too, and if it comes to me, I'll try to address that too. Mr. Brenner.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank you all for your work and your time. I know y'all have put a lot of there, and I think a cost you didn't mention, which this isn't the question, is the opportunity cost of having, you know, smart people continue to work on this bond for another year. I'd sure like to see you working on some things, you know, that you can get going for the kids. My kids are little, but I want to see them start benefiting from these things. My question is, I think some neighbors and some friends who aren't able to be here tonight, one of the questions that they would want me to ask is, you say that right now we have the third lowest debt rate of the school districts in this area after the bond, if it were to be approved, that we would still have the third lowest. Can you tell me what the other districts are, since we are competing against other districts nearby for, you know, new families to move in, and we want to be a desirable, I just want to know what that ranking is.
We have the third lowest tax levy of the districts in the Dallas and Collin County area. The only two districts that have a lower tax levy, and I say levy on purpose because, you know, it's not so much the rate, it's how much do you pay. And so what we try to do is we look at, for the same value of a home across all of those 28 districts, how much would you pay? And for the same value of home, applying the tax rates and the exemptions that each of those districts have, ours is the third lowest. The only ones that have a lower levy are Dallas ISD and Highland Park. And the reason that theirs is lower is because both of those two still provide a 20% local optional homestead exemption, whereas we provide 10. The neighbors to the north, if you look there, it doesn't, you have to go very far. Allen, Plano, McKinney, Frisco, they have, well, Frisco may not, but the others have a much higher tax rate, and they don't offer the homestead exemption. And if you want to see the ranking, it's actually on our website. It's in our budget book for each year. We update that ranking, and so you can go in and see where each of those districts fall.
Are they a lot higher, closer? Can you give me a ballpark?
There's, I think Garland is maybe the fourth, and they're reasonably close. I think the levy amounts of maybe $100 more, and then they start shooting up fairly dramatically, because you've got a district like McKinney, for example, who is taxing at the maximum of $1.17 on the operating side. We're at $1.04, and they're taxing at 50 cents on the debt tax rate. We're at 30 cents. And they have no local optional homestead exemption. So they are right up there at the top on that. Sure.
Couple of questions in the corner.
Hi, good evening. I would like to agree with my neighbor here that we need to remain competitive, but I would argue that we need to remain academically competitive. I think the vast majority of people that move into a district come here for academics. To my question, I did say I would have a question. I have three. If that number, if we cut that in half, that would mean we don't raise taxes. Right? I'm a simple guy, I'm just trying to do simple math. If we brought that and cut that in half, we would not have to raise taxes. Is that a fair question?
We have capacity to issue $235 million worth of debt without raising the debt tax rate.
Okay, so if we cut that number in half, we don't raise taxes.
Correct.
Super. I'm sorry, I'm a nervous public speaker. I apologize. So how much do we pay now in interest, and how much would we pay if this bond were to pass?
You pay about $20 million a year in interest.
This year, $18.2 million in interest expense for existing debt. Next year it will be $19 million. Total debt payment is about $52 million. The rest of that goes to principal. First year, and this is under the maximum calculation. First year with the maximum calculation, interest payment on the new debt under the proposed bond will be about $5 million. And as we mentioned earlier in it, that was using assumptions of a 5.2% rate on the interest, and also with a lower taxable value rate. So, and it also used a $104 million issue in year one. So again, it was a maximum calculation. The reality will be, now we already know, as I mentioned before, if we had to sell bonds today, our blended rate would be about 3.4%. So you're at about, 62% of that number. So instead of a $5 million interest payment on the new money, you'd be looking at about a $3.4 million interest payment on the new money. So it will go down with it. And then also the draw amount won't be $104 million. We haven't finalized that yet. Once we do, we can give everyone a more definitive calculation. We'll be able to know exactly what the impact will be on the debt tax rate. It just will not exceed 8 cents.
Okay, so there is information going around that it's going to be like $40 million a year in interest payments, and that's just...
That's not correct.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then my final question for Dr. Stone is, it's a lot of money, and I'm just not convinced, and I need you to convince me. Is this a question? It's a kind of a question. I need you to convince me that that's going to have a positive impact on our academic achievement, which by almost every standard is failing. And I would ask you, please give me one standard where it's not failing. I'll buy it. But I also, and I have a vote of one. I don't even think I can convince my wife to go with me on this, but $500 million almost, failing academic standards. I know you can't say if we spend this, it will go up, but I mean, $500 million. Tell me how that's going to have a positive impact on academic achievement, which I think by and large everyone would agree is really, use your adjective, I don't want to use hyperbole, but it's not where it should be.
So were you here earlier whenever I was talking about technology? I'm not sure when you came in. Were you here when I went through my...
Yes.
You
Yes,
were
he
here?
was.
Okay, so one of the things that I would say is about technology. I honestly believe that this bond dollars that we are spending as part of this bond, it's just a little bit shy of 80 million, is to support academics and instruction. Because I believe that we're behind in terms of technology, that's a fact. If you were to go around and talk to our teachers that are here, if you were to walk our high schools, they would tell you that we're behind in terms of the technology complement that we have in all of our schools. So that is one of the ways that I believe that will allow for us to roll out curriculum, stronger curriculum to teachers more consistently. It'll build that classroom complement in all of our classrooms. And it will also allow, so technology, I believe, will have a positive impact on academics. I believe that the money that we're investing in our libraries to increase engagement for our students will have a positive impact on academics. It will have a positive impact on instruction. You know, you and I have had a number of conversations, and there's no one, you will not find, you are passionate about academics. There's no one more passionate about academics than I am. And by a show of applause, can I hear if you're passionate about academics? Everybody in this room agrees with you, okay? And so, you know, for the conversations that you and I welcome you, because I think at the last meeting you said, when do I get to talk about academics? Let's you and I sit down and let's talk about, because there are a lot of things that can't be in this bond package that we are doing, and I would love to sit down and talk to you about some of those, as I would welcome anyone to have those conversations. I'm so glad that the whole room agrees about our passion for academics, and we are working really hard, really hard to focus on that in Richardson. So, and I'm going to bring up our board member, because we're out of time, and he's giving me the kill sign here to come up. Yeah, that's Mr. Chris Oliver is going to wrap us up.
Thank you, Dr. Stone. I did not give you the kill sign. I just walked up here. I just want to make some brief remarks, and I know that the hour's late, and appreciate so much all of you being here. It just speaks volumes to your interest in this community and your passion about education. Before I made my remarks, I wanted to recognize my good friend Luke Davis. Luke was a member of the board for some 12 years, and so appreciate him being here tonight. So I just wanted to say, before I begin kind of what I had thought about saying, first of all, that there's a very important dynamic that is behind all of these discussions tonight about the reason why we need to issue debt to do some of these things, and that's that we have a system in the state of Texas where we only get so much revenue per student to educate that student. And we are below the state average in terms of how much money we get per student to educate those students. Many of you may not know that. We're $100 or so below the state average. Plano gets how much more per student than we do? $1,200 more. That's a big difference. And I say that to say that there is no fat in our operating budget to pay for these things. We spend less than 3% of our budget on administration. Okay? The money that we have in our operating budget is going into instruction. I would love if there was some other way other than issuing debt to pay for this stuff, but there just isn't. And I know that many of you who own homes or have assets, you encounter this from time to time as well, and unfortunately you have to incur debt. Now I would say this about that. The good thing about incurring debt is that all that money stays here in our district. Now unfortunately we have to pay interest on that, but I would submit to you that paying interest instead of paying the Austin tax for that money flowing through Austin is not that bad of a trade. Okay, so I just want you to think about it that way. You know, this is one of those important times in the life of a district, and it makes you kind of think about, many of us here tonight have a lot of history in this district. I think about my wife's parents, David and Jeannie Peeler, when they were moving north from Oak Cliff back in 1974, and they had 3 young girls, and they were trying to find a community where they wanted to raise their girls. And they were drawn to Richardson ISD because they wanted what Richardson ISD has, which is a strong community and great schools.
Amen.
Okay? 20 years later, when that cute little 7-year-old had grown up and I convinced her to marry me, and we were trying to figure out where to raise our kids, guess what? We were drawn to Richardson ISD. We moved to the same neighborhood, Spring Creek, and we were drawn here because of strong community and great schools. Sent our kids to Spring Creek, Westwood, and they both attended and graduated right here from RHS. 20 years later, where we are today, we've got businesses moving to this area. We've got houses that go on the market. They're on the market for less than a day, less than 2 days, right? Because people want what we've got. They want a strong community, and they want great schools. Now, many of you probably grew up in this district, and you would love for your kids to come back here someday and live in this district. So the question is, in 10 or 20 years, is this going to be a district that has strong community and great schools? And the answer to that is not going to come until May 7th. That's the question we're going to answer on May 7th. Do we want to continue the tradition of having strong community and great schools? We have benefited from the investments and the support that those who have come before us have made, and now it's our turn. We've talked a lot tonight about the fact that we've got one of the lowest tax levies in Dallas and Collin County, and that's great. And as a homeowner and taxpayer, I love that, but what I don't love is that honestly, I feel like right now we are underinvesting in our kids. And it's time for us to remedy that. So I urge you to vote yes on this bond referendum. And I want you to vote on it with the assurance that this bond referendum has been more thoroughly vetted and shaped by this community probably than any other bond referendum in the history of this district. So I want you to be able to vote yes with the assurance that it has come from your community. But I want you to go beyond just you voting yes. I want you to promise me that you're going to convince at least 5 other people to vote yes. And I'm going to give you the talking points that you need to help convince those people that they should vote yes. Number one, half of this budget is just to make sure that our facilities and our technology stays in good shape. A lot of you guys aware of what's going on in DISD right now with South Oak Cliff High School? That's an example of a facility where needed repairs and maintenance were not done for a long period of time. We cannot let that happen here. We cannot afford to fall behind on maintenance of our facilities or on the refresh of our technology that's so vital to our kids' education. That's half of what's in this bond. There's another quarter of it, which is making sure that we've got room for the families that are trying to move to our neighborhoods. Now, nothing hurts your home's marketability or resale value more than word getting out that there's no room at your neighborhood school. We can't let that happen. We want these families moving to Richardson ISD, and so we've got to make sure that there's room in the schools for them when they move here. And then finally, there's the enrichments. Dr. Stone talked about having a standard complement in our classrooms. I honestly can't believe we don't have that at this point in time. We've got to expand access to career and technical education. We've got 30% of our kids that don't go to college. We've got to get them a license or a certification so that they can earn a living wage when they cross that graduation stage and get that diploma. We've got the libraries, our largest classroom in our buildings, that we need to transform into an area where kids can not only consume information but produce information, where they can work together, collaborate, and create. And then finally, the multi-purpose activity centers. And there have been several assertions tonight that those are not about academics. Well, I just want to say to you that I could not disagree more. I was in band in high school, and I can promise you that my participation in extracurriculars, and specifically for me, band, was the most impactful and memorable part of my high school experience. These multi-purpose activity centers are creating a platform for us to do something that we as a board have wanted to do for a long time, and that is to engage more kids in extracurricular activities, to give them a reason to want to come to school, and to involve them in some kind of an activity that gives them the skills that we so desperately want them to have. Teamwork, collaboration, problem solving. and being involved in something that's larger than yourself. These are the things that we want for our students. And so that's very much about academics, because here in Richardson ISD, we're trying to educate the whole child. And that's how we want to do that. So I thank you again so much for being here tonight. Again, I urge you to vote yes for this and to encourage at least 5 of your friends to do so. Several of us will be here afterward. We're happy to address any questions or comments or concerns that you might have. But with that, I just wish you all a good night. Thank you.
I want to go negotiate a closing statement from the no people, because he's an elected official, I get it, but it's a little on the unethical side. Allow him to say vote yes as the last thing they hear.
No, right?
Why don't you do that?
That's
No, well,
that's
they
what
are,
we're
but they
just.
aren't.
That's what we're having this conversation. We're just. Right.
And nobody said anything about
Right.
Right, and that's but that's going to get entangled. That's going to probably divert the issue a little bit. I just want to ask the question, get told no, and then we can get a lawyer to look at that part. I think
So
that's
let's
a
go
valid
talk.
concern.
You want to go talk to Chris?
Yeah, Chris who?
Oliver, he's who just spoke.